Hi there. Here's a quick walkthrough of our review sheet for exam 1. It's coming up soon. It'll be available for 2 days, Friday and Saturday. And during that time, you get a 3-hour time period. You'll have to find 3 hours to work on the exam. It may not take that long, but during that time, you'll need paper, a calculator, pencil and eraser or pen, and one 3-inch by 5-inch note card of whatever you want, both sides. If you'd like to print out the first page of the formula pages, that is allowed also, and you'll be able to print out the exam to write on it or just work from your own paper. So let's pause here for a moment and just take a look. Where is this review sheet that I'm reading to you? That is in this exam 1 module. It's down posted at the bottom. Review sheet for exam 1 is what we're looking at. I believe it's also in the announcements. I think I emailed it out to everybody. And then this formula sheets that I mentioned, that's in this top module, the overview module. Down near the bottom, I've got something called formula pages here. And so if you want to print that out, this is what it looks like. And we really aren't doing much with it right now. We've got the sample mean and the population mean. We learned about those in chapter 3. And you can see that's got the special notation is all, same formula, but the different labels. And both of those we do on our calculator with one var stats. That blue actually. All right, and then the weighted mean also, that's where we had x values and frequencies. And that's where we put the data or the midpoints into L1, and we put the frequencies into L2, and then again it's the same one variable stats that we did before. All right, so you don't really need to use those formulas. I hope that you use the calculator instead. The range, that might be a good one to know, but that's pretty easy to memorize. And then population variance, I hope none of you are trying to do that formula, the variance. Again, we have one variable stats, and that gives the standard deviation. And then you might know that the variance is equal to the standard deviation squared. And so we did that. We can do that ourselves once we have the standard deviation. All right, and then so hopefully not much of that is going to be needed as formulas. We never did the coefficient of variation. And then the z-score, though, that is something that you need to be able to use, converting into the z-system, a random data value into this z-score, which has mean 0 and standard deviation 1. And then also here, the quartiles. We get the quartiles from one variable stats yet again, but all this stuff together, this is what we use to make box plots. And that was in 3.3, I believe. And this z-score stuff also 3.3. All right, so some useful stuff there from chapter 3. What is not on this data sheet here that you'll probably want to put onto your note card is the empirical rule. And that was, I believe, 3.2. And that's that stuff with the percents, the 68%, the 95%, and then the almost all. And if you'd like to use a percentage, the one that is typically given is 99.7%. So look that up. You do need to be able to do that stuff on the exam. And then for chapter 4, nothing here. I hope you do not try to do this correlation coefficient formula. We've got ln reg on the calculator. AX plus B is the one I talk about, but there's actually 2 of them. And you'll learn how to do that if you look through my notes, my lecture notes and videos for chapter 4. I explain how do you use that, what does it mean, and we don't have to do any of this. I guess right here, the equation, that's just another way of writing y equals mx plus b, or in this order, here it'd be y equals b plus mx. That might be how you remember it from algebra. Our calculator uses an a and a b. So that's all we need from this form. So you can have that out if you think that's useful or not, as you like. All right, back to the review sheet. All of that was just the first paragraph. As it says here, once you start the exam, you'll have 3 hours to complete it and upload your work into Canvas. Canvas will only accept a single document. If you're not quite there yet, getting your photos together, you can email me your exam directly. And there will be a mixture of multiple choice and then demonstration or short answer problems, about 25 questions, and the exam is worth 100 points. Okay. Here's a quick summary of Chapter 1, Basic Ideas. So understand the difference between a population and a sample and their corresponding parameters and statistics. So you might remember that a population has parameters, and that's talking about mean and standard deviation are the ones we mostly know about, proportions a little bit too. And then samples have statistics. That same mean and standard deviation are just called a statistic if it's for a sample. And then we talked a little bit about kinds of ways to get samples in the first place. And simple random sample, convenience or voluntary sample, very similar. And then the clustered and stratified, which are a little bit harder to tell apart. Do you know about those? And then be familiar with the different types of data in 1.2. The main words there, qualitative versus quantitative, ordinal versus nominal, discrete versus continuous. And as I say here, questions will be multiple choice from this section. And then 1.3, the main thing I'd like you to know about is the difference between an observational study and a randomized experiment. The randomized experiment, there's a little bit more control involved. And I don't ask about confounding or types of observational studies. And then 1.4, this is, as I say, it's be able to write a sentence or two about bias in studies, and that comes up from voluntary response, self-interest, types of studies, etc. Notice this, it's less important to come up with an exactly correct answer and more important to say why you chose a particular answer. So can you put into words what's going on? All right, so think about that a little bit and maybe practice in your homework, practice talking to each other about these things. And then what I always do for every chapter is I always refer you to the chapter summary, which is a nice list of vocabulary and concepts. And then there's always a collection of questions that's called the quiz, and then the review exercises. And I handpick them. So if I don't suggest a question, then there will not be something like that on the test. And if I do suggest a question, it may or may not be on the test, right? But it might be good just to think about them. If you don't have time, I wouldn't take the time to do them all, but maybe read them just to see what kinds of things might be possible. Moving on to Chapter 2, we've got graphical summaries of data. Be able to create or answer questions about a frequency distribution, regular or relative, right? Relative is when we had percents or decimals. I will not require you to enter large sets of data into your calculator, only smallish ones. And so that for me is maybe like 10 to 12 pieces of data. Be sure to know the vocabulary for classes. We have upper and lower limits, midpoints, class width. Create or interpret a bar graph or a Pareto chart. And Pareto is just where the highest bar is first. No pie charts on this test. In 2.2, and that was all discrete data in 2.1. 2.2, we went to continuous data, and we created histograms, bar charts essentially, and also the new idea of cumulative frequencies, that running total. And then a couple of words to describe graphs, symmetric or bell-shaped, skewed left and skewed right. Be able to tell those apart. And the only thing I'd like you to take away from 2.3 is the idea of a stem and leaf plot. So either taking data and making a stem and leaf plot, or starting with a stem and leaf plot and reconstructing the data from it. And 2.4, again, not too much from this section. The biggest one is definitely the idea about a vertical axis that does not start at 0. And why is that a problem? It really emphasizes, overemphasizes differences between heights of different bars, maybe more than is appropriate. And then the area thing, I know that's more vague, so don't worry about that one so much. All right, so that's Chapter 2. And again, on the next page, I've got your chapter summary, chapter quiz, and review problems to take a look at just for more variety. If you don't have time for that, just make sure you focus on the homework and can work through the homework. Chapter 3, this is where we started working with the calculator. So I gave some summaries of the calculator functions here. So be able to find the mean, median, and mode from raw data. also be able to find the weighted mean of a frequency distribution. And as a reminder, the midpoint's in L1, frequency is in L2. That's for the frequency distribution in particular. And so that's where we went stat button to the edit feature to get the numbers into the calculator in the first place, and then stat over to the calc menu, and then var stats to do these calculations. And then in 3.2, we introduced the idea of standard deviation. I don't particularly ask about variance, know the connection there, but I will ask more about standard deviation. And it's that same place, all right? You do remember, you do need to be able to pay attention to whether you have a sample, which is labeled S in the calculator, versus a population standard deviation, which I can't make the symbol here, but that was the little sigma symbol. I can try to draw it with my mouse, but it's not going to be very good. It's this little thing here, with a little circle with sort of a horizontal tail on it. Looks more like a pumpkin right now. Anyway, so the same calculations for 3.1 and 3.2. And then we did have the empirical rule in 3.2. And remember, that's not on the formula sheet. So you are going to want to write those percents down on your note card if you don't have them memorized. And that's for bell-shaped data sets. And then 3.3, measures of position. We had quartiles, which, guess what? Again, one variable stats is where this 5-number summary came from. And for percentiles, just knowing about first quartile is 25th percentile, 25%, 50%, 75% for the 3 quartiles. And I don't ask about other percentiles. And then the idea of a box plot from that 5-number summary and using the interquartile range that's on the formula sheet to decide if there's any outliers in the data set. And so again, you can get the beginning numbers from the one variable stats function. And once again, a chapter summary, quiz and review problems. And then lastly, chapter 4. Bivariate data just means that we're connecting 2 pieces of data together, like heights and weights, where I use a lot about the math verbal scores and the math verbal scores and, SAT verbal and SAT math scores was one big example I used in my notes. And you want to be able to look at a scatter plot or create one, just plotting points, and then find this correlation coefficient R. And that's this ln reg AX plus B, the other big place that we need for this exam. And knowing if a linear correlation is positive, meaning that there's an upward trend, negative, there's a downward trend, weak or strong, how close is it to linear. And then coming up with the equation. And ultimately that equation is just a y equals mx plus b kind of a thing, right? So it's familiar linear stuff, just looks a little different here. And using it to make predictions when appropriate. And then looking at M in particular, in my notes, I talk about using the slope to make prediction in outcomes. So look specifically at my example for that in my lecture notes. And then find the coefficient of determination, R squared. That comes out when you find R, so you'll already have it. If you can do 4.1, you'll get the same R squared. And there's a very specific way to interpret it, and you definitely need to look at my notes for that. So take a look at 4.3 in particular. You can, if you don't have time for the videos, do look at my written up lecture notes at a minimum. Everything that I do in those lecture notes is relevant to what you're going to do on the exam. And there's almost pretty much nothing that's not in the notes that is on the exam. So those notes are really good ones for chapter 4. And then the same summary, quiz, and review exercises. And there is, if you have the textbook, there are some tech notes at the ends of chapters 2, 3, and 4 about using the calculator if my notes aren't quite good enough. All right, so that was a super quick Zoom. Do ask questions about things that I've covered here. Come to Zoom with Sarah, come to Zoom with me, and we'll get this exam done. All right, see you soon.